There we go. Everybody see my screen okay?
Looks great.
Yep.
Okay. So for my project, what I'd like to talk about today is the impact of working remote on teamwork. There's been a lot of this lately, so it's very relevant for our current environment. And for me as a manager, it has taken the forefront of a lot of my focus. So in order to dive into this, first, I'd like to talk a little bit about teamwork, what it means, and the dynamics surrounding that, and then a little overview of some of the economic sectors. I'll only be focusing on a very small segment of that, and then kind of hopefully wrap up with some of the effects and conclusions that I've made throughout this process. And PowerPoint is not advancing for me. There. So teamwork. When we talk about teamwork, we've had teamwork our whole lives. You know, when you're little kids, you don't realize that you work together, you play together, you do things that just invariably always involve other folks and collaborating or working together with your parents. And it's a natural building block for the way we interact as humans. You get older and you start to do things that are much less fun and more productivity based. So we get into the workforce and, first you have an introduction in school and you work on projects and things that some may be very intriguing, some may not. Some may be working with people that you have great rapport with, some may not. There is always going to be a diversity of thoughts and diversity of backgrounds in things when we talk about teamwork. We get into the workforce and that becomes even more present. So when you talk about teamwork, you're working across functions, you're working across different cultural backgrounds, you're working across different time zones, and you still have to find a way to adapt, to grow your own skills, grow your interest level, grow, first and foremost, we're all getting paid, grow the company. So, we all want to drive to be successful as a benefit of this teamwork. So we tend to try to strive to work together to build these partnerships that are going to stimulate us, stimulate our work, and enable us to be more efficient, more productive, and more diverse in our thoughts and our innovations. Now we move into the other segment that I wish to talk about, which would be economic sectors. And there's basically 4 sectors that you focus on in our economy. There is the primary economy, which winds up being raw materials, mining, agriculture. So you can think of anything comes from the earth. That's our primary sector. Secondary, you start to think of, okay, what happens with those raw materials? Well, we take them and we make things. So in the secondary sector, you're talking about construction, manufacturing, basically anything where you're translating materials into goods. Third sector, tertiary sector, is a broad field, and that's where we see a lot of our services: entertainment, retail, healthcare, and finance. So you can see there's a lot of things in there that are very interactive in nature. Just the term services implies a connection with people. Then there's also the quaternary sector, which is more knowledge-based: R&D, education, public sector, things we're talking about now, education. Folks here, we all deal with education. So you're looking at secondary sector, manufacturing, tertiary, thinking services, restaurants, anything retail related, and then quaternary education. For my project, I chose to focus on 3 sectors. First, healthcare. What happens in healthcare? Again, very diverse. Generally you think of healthcare, first thing that comes to mind is my doctor. We think doctors, we think surgery, we think all of those things, which very much are face-to-face. So there is no doubt in the healthcare profession, even though there's knowledge base and a lot of R&D, there's a large segment of that is services based, where you aren't really going to have as much remote work. Although we will say there's a lot of teamwork, doctors, operating rooms. There's a lot of things where they have to coordinate and work together. Even most recently, you look at the pandemic outreach. When you start to think of all the logistics and everything that goes into making a vaccine and translating that into eventually winding up in someone's arm involves a lot of steps. Some of them have happened remotely and are able to. Some require a little more personal interaction, being in the lab, collaborating with others. Undoubtedly, all of them require a tremendous amount of teamwork. The next sector I'm addressed in my project was finance sector. When you look at the finance sector, for the most part, you think banking. We have banking, investment, insurance. So there's a lot under the finance umbrella. And as you can see, folks, stockbrokers need to be on the stock market, on the floor of the stock market. You generally think, we actually used to think of, you go to the bank that you need to interact face-to-face with the teller. Well, what we've seen in the past year is that's not necessarily the case. So in the finance sector, we've seen somewhat of a shift too, where much more enabling of remote work. Now, that being said, when you look at things like that, they are not nearly as freeform and open and creative as some of the jobs in healthcare. As far as investment and things, they're much more task driven. So you wind up with a little more standards and things that can drive efficiency in communicating across teams. Third sector I chose to talk about is technology. Technology pretty much spans every sector. Now, for the most part, when we think about technology, though, you're looking at, code, innovation, a lot of the development that we see, the big companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Tesla. Now, even under them, although there's a huge amount of, you see here in my example, coding, things that are very independent and can be done remotely, planning and things like that, the collaboration, the creativity for innovation. You also have things where eventually it comes and gets translated into a tangible good, which requires somebody to be manufacturing it somewhere or someone to be testing. You need to be in a lab, and that requires interaction. Although some things have gotten where we've even managed in labs to set them up so limited resources can be in the lab. They'll set up a chip, a board, some kind of testing materials at a scope or whatever, and that can all be connected to remotely. So the amount of capabilities that we've seen enter on all these fields for remote applications has been tremendous. Even when you come back to healthcare, how many times folks have gone to get a radiology test? You go get an x-ray, and no longer is that radiologist the one that's right there and you're having FaceTime with, the one who's reading your results. Those results are stored digitally and sent somewhere else where another person can check out those results. We've also had in healthcare where you have teledocs. The biggest challenge in all of these fields has become regulations. There's concern over how we administer things and protect privacy when we're doing all these things remotely, because you don't know, much like I'm sure in this presentation, they want to see our faces. They want to know we're who we say we are, and make sure that nothing ill in nature is going on in our presentation. The same thing happens in all of these sectors where you need to make sure that there's no corruption occurring and no theft. Now, after we consider those, we look at teamwork, and then I look at the economic sectors, and focusing on those three, things blew up. This past year, we had all of the pandemic response, and that has kind of been the main part of my research, primarily because that's been what's at the forefront. It's actually been, much to my chagrin, a little more difficult to find conclusive studies on the effects of teamwork and remote work prior to the pandemic. So what happened is I wound up much more focused on the here and now. So when we look at this response, basically, you see that essential jobs did not have this opportunity. There just simply was no remote path for them. And when we consider that, the reality is for this project and discussion of remote work and teamwork, it really only applies to less than 50% of the population. Unfortunately, the other 50% are stuck with needing to be in FaceTime or on-site presence for their job requirements. So again, this is a small segment, but a segment that has been tremendously impacted over the past year. We've made tremendous technology improvements to ramp up and support work. You've seen server improvements, you've seen hiring of extra support staff and things, all to enable people to have better connectivity from afar. We've had additional supplements on collaboration tools, such as Zoom, such as Teams, such as Meet. You see more advancements in SharePoint and many other places. You look at, the collaboration that's done via email, via direct messaging, via Teams messaging, even phone calls. There has been an explosion of investment in remote work. And surprisingly, it's been pretty stable. I think everybody has been amazed at how well we've done. There has not been, for the most part, what people have seen, an immediate productivity loss. The only thing that we do question, and especially is suffering from now, is the thoughts of pandemic burnout. Now, the difficulty I find is most of the articles that I've seen and everything that I've researched, you start to get into the remote work and they conflate some of the pandemic effects with some of the remote effects. I apologize. I'm kind of doing the same thing, but it's very true and very current. And it has been mind-blowing how much this has crept into every nook and cranny of my life, because it impacts my job, it impacts the way I work. And you can't help but think about it almost all the time. And I've struggled to separate the two. So now it's transition, and I'm going to talk about employees' desires, because we go through all those things that have happened in the past year, and it has certainly impacted the way people think about their jobs, their families, and their quality of life, work-life balance, how they see themselves spending their days and their free time, and what they want to do and what they think what situation will work for them. For the most part, there has been a large amount of employees that have really, really embraced working remotely. That being said, the portion that want 100% remote is very small. Most people are really driving towards a little more autonomy in their work environment. They really like the flexibility. They like to be able to spend time with their families. They like to be able to not be in the car for an hour and a half. They like to be able to take up special hobbies. They like to be able to get some chores done in the middle of the day. They've also found, this to be a windfall for their savings. They've been able to save money because they don't have all the commuting expenses. They don't have the wardrobe expenses. They're not going out to lunch on a regular basis. And it has certainly enabled them to pocket a good deal of money. On the downside, we also have some folks who just have really suffered with a work from home. You tend to see, more extroverted people, and especially folks who work from home, they do not embrace the work from home nature. They really prefer to be in the office. They like being around people. We've seen things with drug use, suicide rates, just depression and things that have been on the rise. And that's where you go, wow, working from home when it's that bad on somebody's mental health certainly isn't going to help them collaborate in a team in a remote environment. They prefer to be in the office. Now we go to the other side, the flip side, and we talk about what do employers think? So when we look at employers, they are actually, there's a lot of surprise on the employer front with how working from home has gone and what they've seen and how it's affected their teams and the benefits they've seen. And again, they are very surprised. Productivity really has not suffered. They've seen advancements in communication that have enabled better teamwork, supported all the collaboration they've need, and they have not seen any huge degradation in their ability to produce. They've also seen the benefit of real estate expenses drop, which has been great for them. You don't have not only you have the facilities, not only do you have the overall just straightforward leasing or real estate expense, but when you talk about throwing on a light bulb, you got to power all the equipment, you got to power everything around there, and there's all the additional utilities expenses. If they can reduce facilities to enable more work from home, it will be more detrimental to them in the long run. That being said, what I've seen is most companies are looking for a hybrid model in doing so. They do recognize that teamwork will work in remote environments. However, they don't want to see it happen full time. Every mention is always with respect to a hybrid workplace. So meaning people will still need to be in close proximity to their place of employment and will likely need to spend ballpark about 50% of their time in the office. That way they're getting the face time, they're interacting with their peers, and you can resolve issues, they can check in, and you just get some of those personal benefits while still balancing that with the preference of and the benefits of the work from home environment. Again, when we talk about detrimental effects, because nothing good happens without punishment, we look at new employees are basically the most hit by a 100% work environment. I see it personally, and it's been overwhelmingly difficult. I have 3 new employees, and it's rough. You realize no matter what you do in the interaction, there's a lot to be said for office talk, hallway talk, looking over someone's shoulder, them looking over you, and there's simply no way to make up for that in a remote environment. So you lose some of that, and especially number 2 falls through with that, training and collaboration. It can be difficult. You have to be invested. If you have employees who go, this is terrible, this doesn't work, I don't want to do it, I can tell you it's not going to work. People have to want to be participative in that. And from both of them, we start to talk about social capital. Plays with both of those, play with that. If you can't be in the office and have some face time, it is very hard to pick up on develop social capital. You just don't build those relationships. People tend to gravitate with people that they relate to. You need to work with people that you have diverse opinions with to be able to ultimately come up with better solutions and diverse solutions. Being completely remote, you don't have that advantage. Problems and disconnects. We get to, again, I cannot emphasize enough new employees. Right now we're at a point where it's only been a year, and I don't think the long-term effects have actually evolved enough to have long-term studies, but there's going to be a delay. You just, external people who are more extroverted and interact and connect are much more able to build some relationships, but introverts don't get the attention. They are not as publicly seen, and you really need strong advocates and mentoring to be able to make that work. I personally view that as the biggest opinion, as a personal resources, human resources matter the most. That's why we exist and why we build things, and the values that are brought in development of products. People matter. People being on site doesn't necessarily matter from what I've seen and looked at here, but it does matter if you can't get them connected and can't help them grow and be a part of the team.
Tracey, if I can interrupt, you need to wrap it up.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Again, there's many issues surrounding the problems and disconnects, and as we move forward, there is a compromising solution. And when you look at it, basically what happens is we need a hybrid workplace. I think that benefits employees and employers in a most balanced way. Teamwork, no doubtedly, if you go completely remote, is affected without a doubt. But if we're in a hybrid environment, employees will be helpful. We'll feel enabled and supported, and employers will reap the benefit of not only having the collaboration and everything that they get on site, but they'll have happy, loyal employees who can deliver and be happy in the roles that they have. And at that, I will end my conversation here and my presentation. And please, any questions?
So Tracey, that was fantastic. What a wide sweep of so much you've covered here. I think that was a great presentation. We had a student yesterday who her presentation was a survey of students at RAT as to whether they preferred online education, classwork, or in person, and she found that they vastly preferred in person. And but what we talked about was it's an evolution, right? I mean, even though we've been doing this for a year, and a lot has changed in that year, and a lot of people have got used to a lot of new things, it's still evolving. So if this continued, which it might, this situation continued next year or for another few months, that evolution presumably is going to continue. It's not just the technology which has made it more possible to function remotely, but I think people's attitudes are probably still not necessarily in transition, but they're still coming to terms with it, and we don't really know to what extent they can further come to terms with it beyond what they've already succeeded in doing. So I don't know how you respond to the notion that we really still are as human beings transitioning to what everybody calls the new normal. Do you think we're not done with the transition, right? We're still working on it.
Oh, absolutely. There is so much that will happen, I think, in the next year, and so many studies that will probably happen across all industries, and especially education. What's the ramifications of what we've experienced this past year? Because no one's going to know until there's longer term studies. And I think part of the problem too, we have the past year, human nature, no one likes to be told what to do. We like to be able to evolve and come to our own conclusions, right? And a lot of this in the past year felt forced. And especially for you. I mean, I know in industry, we have a lot more flexibility. Honestly, I've had people 100% remote. I've had people who are always in the office, and most people fall somewhere in the middle. For education, you guys have been forced into what is your norm. And there's a natural knee-jerk reaction. I would say on probably both students and educators fronts where, I don't like it, or people finding the flexibility. And especially for a technical school like RIT, people expect, lab time and face-to-face interaction, and it's a necessity for learning. So it's been amazing, the adaptations that have been made to make sure that people are still getting a quality education and learning the material that they need to. I think that's going to continue to evolve, but I don't think there's any substitute for a certain amount of face time. I mean, I could see for education, you start to look where, most classes you have a lab and you have a certain amount of theory and a certain amount of application. You can very much see where theory can happen online. There's no need really to bring folks in person, but the part that needs to be applied and needs to be hands-on, it just needs to happen in that manner.
Okay, well, I could have asked you a lot more questions, but I don't want to take anybody else's time. So Meg, have you got time for a couple of questions?
Yes, thank you. So Tracey, I'm really interested in this topic. And I think part of what you are talking about here is autonomy. And so I've always been fascinated. The supervisors that I've worked for, our current dean in particular, provides a lot of autonomy, which I equate to as trust, right? He lets me go off and do my stuff. Do you feel like this has really forced the issue with employers to trust their employees? So, traditional work environments, they equate seeing you as you getting the work done.
They like bodies in chairs.
Yeah, so that they can't see you anymore, then you probably aren't doing your work. So do you think this has forced the issue, and then seeing is believing, so productivity hasn't gone down, so they are going to be more trusting?
I would hope that's the case, but I think there's so many variables in this that can make it immensely successful or make it a huge failure. You need, with people, the autonomy is great, but then that can also create ambiguity and communicating of expectations. And you really have to be tied closely with what people are doing without smothering to make sure things don't go off wildly in tangents. So I think you need to really have a good set of standards in place and checkpoints to make sure that you have those things in control so you don't lose a lot of productivity, because that would be demoralizing too. I like to think that no employee, people aren't looking to get by and get over on you. They want to do their best. And if you don't give them the standards and that guidance, everybody's going to suffer. But yeah, it comes down to trust. You have to trust employees or it's just not going to work.
Right. The other thing I'll just bring up as a comment that I thought was really interesting that you touched upon is there's so much peripheral learning that happens when you're in a workspace with other people, stuff that you're not even really aware of. So I thought it was really relevant that you brought up, there is that is lacking. So I might be having a meeting with, say you all are my meeting this morning, but we're not together and I don't hear all the side comments and I don't hear all the, small conversation that's happening and even body language. I think that's really important that you bring up that peripheral information that we are all missing by not being together. So I really enjoyed that.
What I would like to say to that though, is there's also a benefit in that, because when you're 100% remote, everyone has the same experience. My biggest fear is when you get to hybrid is you're going to have some folks in the room and some not. And those side conversations can easily get missed by those that aren't present. So I'm trying to, we're trying to figure out how do we deal with making sure people can get the feel for the room.
Right. And
Okay,
something else that's really important. Sorry, Stephen, I just wanted to say one last thing, which is whether or not Zoom actually creates more equity. Because everyone is having the exact same experience, as opposed to people that are not part of a group and maybe not having a side conversation. So anyway, so many interesting things. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you.
all right. Thanks, Tracy. Justin, you're up.
All righty. Can everyone see it?
Yep.
Oh, there we go. Start from the beginning. It's probably a good idea. Oops. Try and move my. Alrighty, I'm all set. So I did my project on consumer attitudes surrounding technology, specifically phishing attacks and big data usage, and how consumers react towards that, their attitudes towards that, and how they engage, think about it, and what the correlation is between the two. So phishing attacks are any kind of deceitful attempt to obtain a user's information, access, get them to go to a website that they're not trying to go to, and for a malicious intent. It's really not as understood as it should be by like the mainstream of people. Like there's 40 million users every year who are affected by this, but it's not something you really hear about as much as 40 million users a year getting affected by it. There's many anti-phishing technologies like even built into your Google Chrome browser, like I know I use, and I assume many others do. You'll have a little lock at the top left that says you're on a secure site, and there's other things that go into that as well. Even with all of that into it, phishing still takes place because there's the human element, and with that human element, there's flaws. For big data, just about every company now is using big data analytics to measure, to market and sell advertisements. It's just a huge part of marketing and all that now, and users aren't fully aware that that's going on in the background. All this data is being collected, and yeah, you say you in the privacy policy that you're collecting this data, but no one's reading these 5-10 page privacy policies, so it's kind of ethically poor, and users aren't being told about it like they should be. Phishing attacks. So when there's studies done, and the majority of studies that I had found, users were only able to identify a phishing attack about half the time was the average the study showed. One study showed 53%, another one showed from 40 to 80%, one showed 70. Around the average was 50, only half the time people were able to show this was an attack versus this is a legitimate site or email or whatever. And that's pretty scary, knowing only half the time you're getting it right, and half the time that you could be accessing something fraudulently, giving away your information. And 80% of the targeted places are, your online payment processors and your financial banking institutions, because that's where the money is. That's what attackers want to get into and get your information from. And 30% of all phishing emails that are sent are opened by users, with another 12% clicking on malicious links within the emails. So that's pretty scary. That's pretty high number. You think of how many phishing emails there are out there, the percentages add up. That's a lot of people clicking on those malicious emails that you would really think, why? To me, they look obvious, but some of them are hidden very well. And phishing is the most common type of cybercrime last year, according to the FBI. Consumer attitudes towards phishing attacks. People go on the internet for a reason, and it's not to be secure. They go on the internet to interact with people, to do their online purchasing, to do whatever they want to do on the internet, and security takes a back seat. You know, if the most way to be secure on the internet is to not go on the internet. That's the bottom line. The next most secure way is to just have, you know, everything locked down and not go on any sites and not share any data, but you can't use the internet like that. So it's a line that we walk. Everyone does it. How much information you want to share, how many insecure sites you want to go on, and often security is a secondary thought, and it's kind of an afterthought for most people, even for security conscious people. And then for people that aren't security conscious and trust these sites even more, security is not even considered most of the time, and it's very scary. Yeah, and so users that go to, say, like Amazon, they recognize Amazon, they trust Amazon, they know what the site looks like. So then you take a phishing site or phishing email from Amazon, they see Amazon, they just automatically trust the site, and that's why companies try and use these big name companies as fraud sites, because company or users will trust these big name companies without really questioning too much. That's something users are familiar with, and they'll just trust it blindly. And users are very overconfident in their ability to seek out phishing sites and just over rely on visual cues, like looking at a site. Yeah, it doesn't look like, it looks like a regular put together site, so it must be right, instead of checking the URL, checking other security features of it, making sure you're on the right site, Googling it, and other background information to make sure what you're getting into is what you're supposed to be getting into and not some fraudulent site, email, link, whatever. Big data breaches have been happening more and more so every year. Remember, Target was a big one a couple of years ago. More recently, Equifax, 150 million user in personal information got hacked or released or compromised, I should say. And it was very sensitive info that was compromised. 150 million Americans. That's a big number. Facebook in 2018 had a big issue. Zuckerberg had to go to Capitol, and he had to be put on trial, basically. Not trial, but he had to go answer questions for a couple weeks about what went on there, because there was a personality quiz that was run through Facebook, and it collected all this personal information, which was then sold to a third party. And that's not okay. And there was legal concerns there, and obviously very ethically poor judgment. But Facebook's not really known for their good ethical judgment. So 87 million users had their personal information compromised from that. But after a few weeks, you know, it kind of just blew over, as these data breaches do. People aren't too concerned as they should be about it. It just kind of takes a back seat. And all this information is used. I mean, 90% of executives depend on consumer data for marketing activity. They really want your data, and they will do what they can, bend the rules they have to get it, because it is effective at marketing. And Americans appreciate seeing relevant info. I mean, if you're a guy that likes fishing, you want to see fishing ads instead of ads for whatever, baby strollers or something. It just, they don't fully appreciate the security and the privacy. They like having things convenient, and it's scary. Once again, privacy takes the back seat. The free content, the ability to interact with people seamlessly, just the usability is all more important to them, instead of being secure, having their stuff private. It's all an afterthought. In conclusion, consumers treat privacy and security in same regards to both phishing and big data. They don't think about it, security and privacy. It's just not something they think. You go on the internet, you're not concerned about it. You just see your computer and you think no one else is going to worry about it, but it's there in the background at all times. People are trying to get your information, trying to get into your system, trying to steal your information. and consumers are just not worried about it. And consumers are very overconfident in how much they know about big data. They think it's not as widespread as it is, or they don't know how widespread it is, or they don't care. And they are very overconfident in how well they can detect a phishing attack. I see a lot of similarities there in between the two. They think they can see a fraudulent site when really there's studies every like 5 or 6 studies I found that said only half the time people, even when they're knowingly looking for fraudulent sites, even only half the time they could find the fraudulent site. So it's very scary. And this is something that will only get more and more prevalent. Big data is not going away. That's going to stay forever unless huge laws get changed, which that's not going to happen. And phishing attacks are going to be here. And the thing with that is, as the younger generation comes up, we're more adept to technology, so we will know what to look for, I feel, a bit more than older generations who are a bit more trusting of technology, in my perspective, from my experience. So I think the human element of phishing attacks, along with better technologies, will mitigate that in the future, but that's still years away. And that's it.
Thanks, Justin. Meg, do you want to go first this time?
Yes, definitely. So Justin, this is so relevant. Just actually about 2 weeks ago, I got something from the New York State Department of Labor because someone has fraudulently filed for unemployment insurance using my name.
Yeah, my dad had the same thing happen.
which was so startling.
Yeah.
And so it, our IT is involved now, and obviously New York State, and I've done all the necessary things. But, I think that you're right that it's probably generational and there is an overconfidence. But I'm wondering if that overconfidence is really more related to just not having the knowledge. And the other thing I'm wondering too, so as someone that's part of a large organization like RIT, I'm required every year to go through it's training on basically this type of information, how to avoid phishing attacks, how to, maintain my laptop, basically trying to prevent any privacy breaches. So I go through that mandatory online training. I'm not sure how effective it is. So what would you say are good recommendations for this generation? Not this generation, I mean, kind of a place like RIT to be better adept at preventing this, because I don't know how effective that online training is. Really, I do it to be done with it.
And that's the thing. That's how everyone views any kind of online training.
Right.
That's a preventative measure, what to look out for. Here's some common ones. That's, it's like taking a vitamin in the morning. How much does it do? You never really know. It doesn't hurt to do that. But RT, I don't know if you noticed, I've certainly seen the emails. There's been in the past, this attack is going on. People are trying to do this. Now, I feel RIT is very on top of that, being very technical school and all. They're very on top of those kind of threats, and they mitigate them and respond to them very quickly, I feel like. So RIT is, I feel like, very above average as far as dealing with these kind of phishing attacks and such. But as for a regular organization, because RIT is kind of above the usual, I would say.
Sure.
Certainly the basic training, but also there's screenings of emails, website screening, like checking the URLs just at the networking level before it even gets to the end user, because the end user, the human element, there will always be that issue of the human element. There's always going to be failure there to correctly identify. Whereas if you limit that to the best of the ability, that's going to be the best option.
Right. Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think RIT, I do pay attention to those emails, and when they're referencing an Amazon or a, Apple gift card, something or other, you know, I do pay attention to it and at least kind of log it in my subconscious so that I'm thinking about it. It'd be interesting to think about maybe breaking this down into generational groups and maybe the ways in which we should help different generations. Because I think you're right. Your generation is much more adaptable and flexible and aware than my generation. So I think it's interesting. So I enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Justin, a couple of points. First of all, I remember this makes me think back to when somebody came to my grandmother's door and told her that she needed her chimney repaired and she needed to pay a down payment, and of course she did, being 80 years old, and of course he never came back. So scams like that, we've always had those. Just does seem that they are more prevalent today, I guess. There's more opportunity. So I loved how you put together both the illegitimate, the phishing, and the legitimate, the collection of big data. I mean, it's not always easy to tell those apart, but I thought the fact that you mentioned that a couple of times in your presentation was bang on. It's not just phishing, it's also what is happening, quote, legitimately. And I think you're quite right when you say, you know, they put these CYA five-page long explanations of what all you're giving up, and of course nobody reads them. And I don't know. I imagine 99% of people don't read them. And it does seem to be getting worse. For example, I spent some time in China, and not so much, well, I suppose also phishing and big data, but there you know, CCTV is all over the place. I think I saw a data point where they have more cameras out in public than they actually have people, and they have a lot of people. And it seems like that's coming into the West too, even though we are supposedly a democracy. That big brother control through knowing what you're doing is an extension of your project, but it's in the same ballpark to my way of thinking. I don't know what to do about it, right? It seems like it's almost, it can't be stopped. It's just part of the way society is right now. So, you know, RIT is a beneficiary in a way because we have a computer security program that we never used to have. I agree absolutely with Meg that those training sessions are a complete waste of time. I mean, I guess you have to do it. I mean, they make the employees do it, but I don't think it helps at all. Anyway, I thought your presentation was excellent in the scope of what all you took into account. I want to ask you though, where do you go with this? I mean, was this just a project and you move on, or is this something that you personally are interested in and you think you're going to work a little bit more in this area?
Well, big data, I'm certainly interested in. With how much, I mean, that's always going to be there. How much, to me, it's cool looking at how they can take that data and turn it into something useful. So that's always something I'm going to be looking at, like from an analytics standpoint. How that, like, just data to me is cool, I guess. It's cool to see how it can be used in different ways for different things besides just marketing. But yeah, I don't know how to put it into words, but that'll be always something I'm just kind of looking at.
Right, and you're going to have to decide all the way along, this is data that I could have, but should I have it?
It's certainly in a gray area, and the US government is horrible at keeping up with technology as far as laws are concerned. And as you mentioned, RIT policy or the training they do, that when I said it was a good idea, I meant the idea of it is good. I haven't personally seen the training, so I don't know how quality it is, but the idea of doing training is good, and if it's carried out right, I would think it's helpful.
Okay, anyway, I really enjoyed your presentation. Very timely, great job. Anybody with any other questions?
Yeah, I just would like to say I both resent and resemble the generational comment. Folks of my generation created the infrastructure that we're talking about, and while I realize I mean, I think it varies across any generation. And Justin, I think you nailed it when you said FOMO, and that represented that struck home. I think you're talking about that because generally this phishing and everything is driven by fear of missing out. People are going to click and be adventurous because they want to know more and they don't want to be left behind. And generationally, I think you have folks in every camp across every generation. Some people my age, older, are super fearful, and some will click anything. Same as, you know, you look at all the influencers and everything out there. You can't tell me they aren't falling victim to phishing because I don't think they really take this stuff seriously. But yeah, awesome presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Absolutely. It's just kind of an ignorance towards how important one click of the finger on a computer can be. You know, it's just, oh, what I click one thing, what's the worst thing that could happen, you know? But
Yeah.
really bad things can happen with just a few clicks.
Okay, thanks, Justin. And now our last presenter is Zach. Zach, are you ready?
Beautiful. All right. I think this will work. Hi. If you're able to pin me, I'm a webcam view, not a screen share view.
Okay.
Here we go. Let me hop over to PowerPoint. Beautiful. Hi, folks. It has been a wild semester. I'm going to aim to have this presentation wrapped up by around 9 for Q&A. I think that is a good pace for this.
So Zach, just really quick, do you have your
Yes.
PowerPoint up?
Oh, God, 1 second. Are you able to see my webcam?
What I see is a black screen that says PaceRIP.
Yep, that's a PowerPoint.
Oh, this is the PowerPoint.
This is the PowerPoint. Yep,
All right.
here we go. Yeah, I can just click. Beautiful. All right. So, this is a brief story about how this recreation of an abandoned East Berlin train factory led to a showcase of the RIT competitive game scene and concluded with this website, which is live right now, pace.rip, real thing. You can go to it, works on phones, very practical, ships out. So that archival recreation I began last semester. Come Closer is an art installation by the artist Schwan. She went to a festival taking place in old East Berlin. A bunch of artists swarm into this abandoned East Berlin train factory and repurpose the space for their own needs and ends. My task was to recreate the space in virtual reality, which I certainly began. Unfortunately, what put a damper on this project, and especially this semester, what put a damper on it, was everyone's favorite industry infighting. The Unity engine, which is the tool I was using to create the project, has quirks with capturing input. So I wanted, as I was figuring out these quirks, to be able to show folks what I was doing, to have maybe more engagement or chats with folks as I was working on the project. I didn't really have a good place to do this. We have Zoom, which works well, but it's a bit formal. It's very two-way. There's sites like twitch.tv, which works, but it's ad ridden. It's a bit cluttered. There's data privacy concerns, especially because of its use of ads. It's owned by Amazon. Folks don't like to hear. So I ended up looking into a service called Peertube. Peertube isn't a site, it's a piece of software. It's a video site framework, and it now supports live streams as of November 2020. Live streaming is what we're doing right now through Zoom, but this is a Peertube gives a one-way live stream. So you have folks in a text chat and then one video. I was looking into Peertube different sites that use this piece of software. It doesn't have ads built in. I found the site called Diode Zone, hosted by a now friend. I ended up hosting a marathon with over 40 concurrent viewers. This is the schedule for the marathon. I wrote up a website. I learned how to do all this crazy formatting for web development. I've been doing web development for a little bit, but nothing of certainly this scope. This is what Peertube itself looks like. A high Mark Zuckerberg, if you can see him grimacing in the thumbnail. This is what a standard Peertube instance looks like. An instance is what runs the software. At the end of the marathon, which went very well, I had a bunch of folks hop in. I had a bunch of folks participate actually on stream, showing off their games that they wanted to demonstrate their ability in. I was really interested in how I could produce an instance like this myself. And the answer for that is it's complicated. I ended up writing over 300 lines of styling code, learning how to configure a website through a terminal, which is a little text box you can pull up on your screen to communicate with a server. You're not using any interface software. You're not clicking to get this to work. Instead, you're typing up essentially different codes to load the software up. And that's something I had very little experience with before this. Getting my hands into this was an uphill battle, but thank heavens it's running now. To give a brief example of why things are such a hassle. In the last presentation, Justin mentioned that little green lock you see in the top left of a website when it's secure. What you might not realize is getting that lock is a hassle. You have to talk to a robot and say, hey, will you hijack my website to see if I deserve this lock? And that's all done by typing text up into a terminal, asking the bot, pretty please, will you give me my certificate of I am a good actor. I really don't want to mess with your data, please. And hopefully they will give you that little green lock. I learned that getting folks to transition to a site that they're not used to is very difficult. It's a slow process that I'm still going through, and of course, a complete transition from one site to another isn't my goal. We do want to avoid the sort of monopolies, those instances where we're all huddling around the same service, because that service has control over what gets seen and what doesn't get seen. So I think it was Jacob Nielsen, a UX specialist, who said that folks spend most of their time on other websites. So when you're designing your own, you have to be hyper aware of the design patterns that guide usage. When folks transition between different websites, they have a set of expectations. Clicking any link, looking at any page that should guide your design decisions. And I decided to prioritize a transparency of purpose with this website. So being very clear on Twitter when I was communicating about the site that we have no intent to monetize it, that if you're switching to this site, it's not about ads or anything of the sort. And this carries over into the Come Closer project, which is archival reconstruction. Bringing this space into a virtual realm, you have to be very transparent about maybe a non-commercial or academic intent that you want to bring, or artistic intent. In this way, the vendor is the message. If you're using a medium like the web or like virtual reality, you want to be clear with your users, and they need to understand why you're choosing a particular medium. And that is trickier in practice than I expected. Finally, users crave feature parity. This is very true on websites. Again, when you're hopping from one website to another, you just expect things to work. And that's tough when you're building everything from the ground up. You need to pay attention to what other sites are offering and try to give a similar enough experience with your own twist, of course. Peertube is developed by folks out of a nonprofit. They do work for the benefit of folks, and so development can be slow. I've been working on my own end to implement features like shorter links that are useful and bring that feature parity. When I start working more on VR projects, I will be paying close attention to the state of the industry and what folks expect, especially from an accessibility standpoint, where you want to get from point A to point B as efficiently as you would reasonably expect. Thank you, folks. Here's some more info. That's the URL, that pace.rip. Again, it's a live site, works on mobile. I did the site styling, so everything looks decently fancy. I've got my site and credits there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Zach. So all three of the presentations this morning have been very thought-provoking, and you know, I think I can speak for Meg too. We find these presentations, which come from all across the spectrum, fascinating, and we learn perhaps a lot more than the students do. But in any case, the juxtaposition of your presentation with Justin, I was just getting used to the idea from Justin that that little green lock is something I can trust, and now you've totally demolished that trust because you get it by a robot who makes a judgment about you.
I could go back to if you look, the text is going to be really tiny, but what that rectangle picture is saying, if you look at certbot, it says that whenever I need to, this server will automatically ask a bot, say, hey, are we talking to folks in the right way? And the bot will say, yeah, I can verify that. Folks tend to trust the robot. So when the robot gives you the thumbs up, then you'll get the green lock. And that's been a journey. That actually hasn't been the process for a long time. It's only in the past 5 years that that green lock has become standard.
Well, I'm not old enough yet to trust a robot, so I'm not trusting any robots. So, more seriously, I kind of lost. You know, your project was about this making this real-time art installation in East Berlin. And doing it virtually, and I don't know whether you did that or not. I mean, what happened there?
I have been working on this project. It's still very much in progress. I've gotten a lot better at the tools involved, especially the code behind it. Has been something I've learned throughout the semester. I realized maybe about halfway through that the skill set I needed for this is going to have to come from other places. And especially if I wanted to stream this development to share it with other folks, I wanted a place to do that. And I feel there's enough of an open access overlap that they're sister projects in a sense.
So this is something you're going to continue to work on after this semester, is that?
Yes, I'll be working on it through the summer. I'm going to RIT for grad school, so this will be a part of that.
So we will grade your work over the semester, of course, but I would love to see the thing when it's finished. That would be
Yeah.
great. You can.
Thank you.
that
I'll do my best to link you that when the time comes.
Okay. Well, I thoroughly, even though a lot of, there's so much new vocabulary, and you're obviously very facile with it, and I'm not. Anyway, I'm learning. Meg?
Thanks, Stephen. So Zach, wow, there is so much here, and I have followed you in a lot of the different creative projects that you've been working. I'm wondering, well, first of all, I'm really curious about what you're planning to go to grad school for, and then I'm also curious. Have you put together a portfolio of all these different projects? I mean, the expanse of creativity is really remarkable. And I just love to hear more about what you want to do once you are launched, I guess.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'll be going to grad school for human-computer interaction. I actually have to pay that deposit probably today or tomorrow. My dad is getting out of the hospital. He just had back surgery that had been planned. Funny enough, so that's going to be a crunch. I will make sure to get that in. Weird tangent. In terms of a portfolio, I just revamped ZacharyTalis.com with some of the styling tricks that I learned from this project. If you go there, it gives you a boilerplate overview of me, and then if you look for the link that says timeline portfolio, that is a reverse chronological look at what I've done.
I am going to check it out. How fantastic that you have your own URL and that you can maintain your name.
Yeah, no, it's good having a weird name.
Yes, and it's great having your own kind of virtual real estate. So
yeah. Actually, funny enough, because RIT provides edu email addresses, it's simple enough for anyone to host a website if they know the programming languages HTML and CSS, which is what the website is. The web is built off of. GitHub pages hosting. It's very good, and I appreciate RIT's ability to provide that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. I can't wait to see the probably not finished project, finished product, but the next phase. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I just wanted to comment. It was cool. It started. The story started at a East Germany train station. I ended up talking about websites.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Very cool storyline.
Yeah. I just took a look at. I appreciate that sentiment. It's very helpful to hear, actually. This recreation, I took a look at this model file, and it's amazing how much I've learned since I made it last semester. I put the very basic layout together towards maybe the middle or end of last semester. I've been working to make it, there are a few quirks with the layout that I am adjusting to make it more true to life, because I do want to give a proper archival reconstruction of this space. So all of this, all these vertices, all the shapes that you see are misaligned. I have to go back and snap everything to the grid, to the coordinate system that I really want to work on if I'm going to be continuing this project through the summer. It will be another uphill battle, but I'm excited to tackle it.
So I'm going to have the last word, and in contrast to what Justin just said, I rather wish we'd stayed with the East German train station, because I lived in Berlin when the wall was still there. We used to
wow.
We used to go across to East Berlin on the train, so I'm much more familiar with East Berlin train stations than I am with this technology this guy is talking about today.
Oh my God. I mean, here's hoping when the pandemic lifts, I'm actually able to visit a place or maybe similar abandoned locations. I want to do my best to recreate maybe the texture, the materials of the place. So that's honestly, that's really good to know.
Yeah, you should make sure there's lots of hissing steam.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, volumetric, just
Thanks,
love it.
everybody. That was a great session. Really enjoyed all three presentations. Meg, you want the final last word?
Of course, I would love the final last word. Just a reminder, such fabulous presentations, we'd love to keep them, but again, let us know if that isn't your preference. Really proud of this work that you've been doing, and we hope that you'll stay in touch with us. Congratulations in advance for the next step for many of you, which is graduating, and just hang in there. You're really close to the finish line. So fantastic job, and stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, once again, great session. My goodness.
Yeah, hold on, let me just stop.